Don't sit with us, scholarship trash. Blake Weston shoves Elias Sterling into a row of lockers while 60 students in pressed uniforms stream past without a glance. The only black kid at Ashford Preparatory Academy crumples against the cold metal, textbooks scattered across marble floors that his mother cleans every Thursday night, and nobody stops to help. For 4 years at Ashford Prep, this was Elias's daily reality, the poor black student surrounded by old money families who made sure he never forgot he didn't belong in their world of country clubs and legacy admissions. Graduation came, and Elias disappeared without a trace. 12 years later, those same bullies send a reunion invitation to the prestigious Weston family estate, making private bets he won't even show up, and if he does, that he'll arrive in some beat-up Honda, still broken, still small. But on November 8th, when a stretched obsidian black limousine glides up the circular driveway and the class loser steps out in a tailored Brioni suit, every person at that private estate realizes they've made a catastrophic miscalculation. The scholarship kid now owns a tech empire worth $840 million. 12 years ago, Elias Sterling was 16 years old and invisible every single day. The only black student at Ashford Preparatory Academy, class of 2013, full scholarship recipient, a fact that Blake Weston weaponized with surgical precision. They called him charity case, the way other people use slurs, with just enough institutional protection to avoid consequences, but with clear intent to destroy. Blake Weston perfected the art of public humiliation, cafeteria pranks that drew laughter from everyone except Elias, accidental collisions that sent his lunch tray flying, invitations to parties that turned out to be elaborate setups for mockery. 4 years of calculated cruelty that carved permanent wounds into his psyche. Graduation day arrived. Elias left Ashford behind. He swore to himself he would never feel that powerless again. The dozen years between then and now told an entirely different story. Community college first, working double shifts at his mother's cleaning company to afford tuition, then MIT transfer on another merit scholarship, a cramped apartment with 3 roommates, teaching himself to code in libraries until 2 a.m., a breakthrough algorithm that caught the attention of a venture capitalist, sleepless months building a prototype that revolutionized data encryption, perfect timing when cybersecurity concerns exploded globally, Series C funding that made Wall Street Journal headlines, Sterling Innovations, $840 million valuation, 1,200 employees across 5 continents, TechCrunch Founder of the Year at age 29, billionaire status at 30. 3 weeks ago, an embossed invitation arrived at his penthouse office. Ashford Prep Class of 2013 12-year reunion, hosted at the Weston estate. Would love to see where life took you, Elias. The handwriting was Blake's, the condescension unmistakable. Another message Elias wasn't supposed to see, forwarded by Marcus Chen, a former classmate who'd felt guilty for 12 years, revealed the group chat Blake created. $20 says he doesn't even show up. 50 says he shows up in an Uber wearing a JCPenney suit. Wonder if he's still cleaning toilets like his mom. They invited him back to humiliate him one final time. Tonight, Elias accepted the invitation, but not on their terms. Welcome to Midnight Plot Stories. If you're already hooked on Elias's journey from the class loser to the man stepping out of that limousine, then do me a favor, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you want more stories about underdogs who refuse to stay down, and drop me a comment telling me, what would you say to your high school bully if you had Elias's level of success? I read every single comment, and trust me, some of your revenge fantasies are even better than the stories I write. Now, let's find out exactly what Elias is about to reveal to Blake Weston on that terrace, because the limousine entrance, that was just the opening act.
7:18 p.m. The limousine turns onto the tree-lined private road leading to the Weston estate. Through tinted windows, Elias watches the mansion emerge from the dusk, the same property where he was once denied entry to a classmate's birthday party because the help uses the service entrance. His driver, James, a former Marine who's worked for Elias for 3 years, catches his eye in the rearview mirror. "Ready, sir?" Elias adjusts his platinum cufflinks. Let's give them a show. The limousine rolls to a stop at the circular fountain where luxury sedans and SUVs are already parked in neat rows. Through the estate's floor-to-ceiling windows, Elias can see them, his former classmates, glasses of champagne in hand, the same faces that watched him suffer and did nothing. The vehicle's polished black exterior reflects the golden light spilling from the mansion. Conversations on the terrace die mid-sentence as heads turn in unison. James steps out, walks around the vehicle with military precision, and opens the passenger door. Elias Sterling emerges. Gone is the terrified teenager in a second-hand uniform. In his place stands a man who commands boardrooms, a man whose signature determines the fate of 1,000-employee companies, a man who looks exactly like the powerful figure in the reference image, impeccably dressed, radiating quiet authority, every inch a titan who built an empire from nothing. 53 faces stare at him in absolute silence. Grace Mitchell, who once slipped him lunch money in 9th grade, gasps audibly, her hand covering her mouth. Sarah Chen, who was the only person to sit with him at graduation, drops her champagne flute. It shatters on stone. And Blake Weston, standing at the top of the terrace steps in his family's estate, his mouth slightly open, realizes with dawning horror that something has gone terribly, irreversibly wrong with his plan. Elias walks toward the steps, each footfall deliberate. The crowd parts instinctively, creating a pathway. Blake has no choice but to greet him. He's the host, trapped by the social contract he's always weaponized against others. Elias. The name emerges strangled, barely above a whisper. You actually came." They shake hands. Blake's palm is slick with cold sweat despite the crisp autumn evening. His grip is desperate, overcompensating. "Blake," Elias's voice is measured, calm. "Thank you for the invitation." "That's quite a ride." Blake gestures toward the limousine, his laugh brittle and hollow. "Did you rent that for the night? Must have cost you." Elias offers the slightest smile, enigmatic and controlled. His eyes, which once filled with fear whenever Blake approached, now hold something Blake can't quite read. Something like that. He doesn't elaborate. The silence expands, suffocating. Blake shifts his weight, suddenly aware that the entire reunion is watching their exchange, that every whispered conversation has ceased, that dozens of phones are now recording. The social hierarchy that Blake has clung to since high school begins its tectonic collapse in real time. People gravitate towards Elias, subtle movements that accumulate into an unmistakable shift, a step here, a turned shoulder there, orbit realigning around a new center of gravity. Vanessa Hartley, Blake's fiancée, blonde and polished in a designer gown that costs more than most people's monthly rent, approaches with a smile that seems genuinely impressed rather than patronizing. "Oh my God, that entrance was absolutely cinematic," she says, extending her hand. "I'm Vanessa. I don't think we've met." "Pleasure to meet you, Vanessa." Elias's handshake is warm, professional. And then someone in the crowd, Marcus Chen, still feeling guilty after all these years, asks the question everyone is thinking. "Elias, man, what have you been up to? You just disappeared after graduation." Elias turns to assemble the assembled crowd, all those faces that once looked through him as if he didn't exist. His expression remains unreadable, controlled. "I've been building something," he says simply. "Building what?" Blake interjects, his tone carrying an edge of desperation masked as casual curiosity. "Are you, like, in construction, or—" "Not exactly." The way Elias says it, quiet, almost amused, sends a ripple through the crowd. There's a story here, something massive they don't yet understand. Grace Mitchell, her eyes glistening with emotion, steps forward. "Elias, I'm so glad you came. I've thought about you over the years. I'm sorry we weren't better to you back then." "Grace," Elias's expression softens slightly, "you were always kind, you and Sarah both." Blake, sensing control slipping further from his grasp, attempts to reassert dominance. "Well, we should probably head inside. Dinner's almost ready. Elias, I hope you don't mind, but we didn't set up a seat for you at the main table. I can have the staff set something up at—" "That won't be necessary." Something in Elias's tone makes Blake stop mid-sentence. Actually, Blake, before we go inside, there's something I think everyone should know. About this estate, about tonight, about why I really accepted your invitation. The autumn air seems to crystallize. Every person on that terrace leans forward imperceptibly, sensing that whatever comes next will shatter everything they thought they understood. Blake's face drains of color. What are you talking about? Elias's smile deepens just slightly, enigmatic and devastating. Well, Blake, let me ask you something first.
The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to the 47th floor of Sterling Tower in downtown Manhattan. Elias's executive assistant, Patricia, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd seen enough corporate warfare to smell trouble, placed it on his desk with unusual hesitation. "This came for you personally, Mr. Sterling, hand-delivered. The courier said it was urgent." The envelope was cream-colored, heavy stock, with gold-embossed lettering that screamed old money. Ashford Preparatory Academy, class of 2013. His name was written in calligraphy across the front, elegant and mocking in equal measure. Elias stared at it for a long moment before opening it. 12 years, and his hands still wanted to tremble at the sight of that academy crest. Inside, the invitation was exactly what he expected, and worse. Gold-stamped borders, formal language that barely concealed its contempt. "We cordially invite you to celebrate 12 years since graduation at the Weston family estate." Blake's personal note was handwritten at the bottom. "Would love to see where life took you, Elias. Let's catch up on old times." Old times, as if they'd been friends, as if those 4 years hadn't been a systematic campaign to break him. Elias set the invitation down and pulled out his phone. 3 missed messages from Marcus Chen, a former classmate who'd kept loose contact over the years. Guilty conscience, Elias suspected, from watching the bullying without intervening. The first message was straightforward. "Did you get the reunion invite?" The second was apologetic. "Man, I need to tell you something." The third was a screenshot of a group chat Elias wasn't supposed to see. Blake Weston. "Just sent the invite to our scholarship friend, taking bets on whether he shows." Tyler Morrison. $20 says he doesn't even respond. Chase Drummond. 50 says he shows up in an Uber wearing some cheap suit from Men's Warehouse. Still broke, still pathetic. Blake Weston. God, I hope he comes. Been planning this for months. The look on his face when he realizes he's still the same loser will be priceless. Elias read the messages twice, his expression unchanging. Patricia, still standing near the doorway, watched him carefully. She'd worked for Elias long enough to recognize when that particular stillness came over him, the kind that preceded decisions that reshaped entire markets. "Mr. Sterling, is everything all right?" He looked up, and something in his eyes made her take an involuntary step back. Not anger. Anger was hot and reactive. This was colder, more calculated. "Patricia, what's my schedule look like for November 8th? She pulled up her tablet, scrolling quickly. "You have the Tokyo investor meeting that morning, but the evening is clear. Were you planning to clear the entire day?" He picked up the invitation again, studying Blake's handwriting. "And get me David Morrison from our legal team. I need property records for an estate in Connecticut." "Property records, sir?" "The Weston family estate. I want to know everything about it. Who owns it, what the tax situation looks like, whether there are any outstanding liens or debts." He paused, his mind already working through scenarios. "And Patricia, this stays completely confidential." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. After 3 years as his assistant, she'd learned not to question these moments. "Of course, Mr. Sterling." As she left, Elias turned his chair toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. 47 stories below, the city moved with indifferent momentum. Up here, in the empire he'd built from nothing, he was untouchable. But Blake's invitation had found the one crack in his armor, the part of him that was still 16 years old, still being shoved into lockers, still hearing the laughter echo down marble hallways. They wanted to see where life had taken him. Elias Sterling smiled, cold and precise. He'd show them exactly where life had taken him, and where it was about to take them. He picked up his phone and typed a single-line response to the RSVP email. "I'll be there. Looking forward to catching up." Then he forwarded Marcus's screenshot to his private folder, labeled it Reunion Materials, and opened a new email to his chief financial officer.
The trap Blake had set was about to spring in a direction Blake never imagined.
The journey from Ashford Preparatory's marble halls to the 47th floor of Sterling Tower took 12 years, but it felt like several lifetimes compressed into one relentless climb. Graduation night 2013. While his classmates celebrated at yacht parties and exclusive clubs, Elias sat in his mother's one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx, staring at acceptance letters he couldn't afford. Harvard wanted him, Stanford wanted him, but wanting and affording were different worlds entirely. He chose City College, full scholarship, close to home, close to the warehouse job that paid $12 an hour on night shifts. His mother cried when he told her, thinking he'd sacrificed his dreams. He hadn't. He'd just learned that dreams required strategy, not sentiment. 2 years of 70-hour weeks, classes during the day, loading trucks until 4 a.m., 3 hours of sleep, repeat. His grades stayed perfect because failure wasn't an option. It was a death sentence back to the world where Blake Weston's cruelty had defined him. The MIT transfer came in 2015, another scholarship, another city, another cramped apartment with roommates who complained about his obsessive coding sessions. While they partied, Elias taught himself advanced cryptography in the library, surviving on vending machine coffee and the kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food. The breakthrough happened on a Tuesday in February 2017. Elias had been working on an encryption algorithm for 9 months, something that could secure data transmissions in ways existing protocols couldn't touch. He'd hit wall after wall, each failure carving deeper into his savings and sanity. Then, at 3:47 a.m., staring at lines of code that had defeated him for weeks, he saw it, the pattern everyone else had missed, elegant and devastating in its simplicity. He built the prototype in 72 sleepless hours. The algorithm could encrypt data in real time without the processing delays that plagued every other system. For companies handling millions of transactions per second, it was revolutionary. For Elias, it was survival crystallized into code. He sent the prototype to 12 venture capital firms. 11 ignored him. The 12th, Catherine Zhao at Apex Ventures, saw what he'd built and wrote a check for $2 million in seed funding within a week. Sterling Innovations was born in a converted warehouse in Cambridge with 3 employees, Elias, his childhood friend Jordan Williams, and a brilliant engineer named Priya Kapoor, who believed in the vision enough to defer her Stanford PhD. The first year nearly killed them. 18-hour days building the product, pitching to clients who dismissed them as too young, too inexperienced, too ambitious. Their burn rate was unsustainable. They had 4 months of runway left when Elias landed the meeting that changed everything. Goldman Sachs needed a solution for their cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Elias walked into a conference room of executives 3 times his age and showed them what his algorithm could do. The live demonstration took 12 minutes. The contract negotiation took 6 hours. When he walked out, Sterling Innovations had its first major client and $15 million in committed revenue. The dominoes fell rapidly after that. J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, every major financial institution bleeding money from data breaches suddenly needed what Elias had built. Series A funding, $25 million, 2018. Series B, $80 million, 2019. Series C, $200 million, 2020, just as COVID sent remote work and digital security concerns into the stratosphere. By 2022, Sterling Innovations had 1,200 employees, offices in New York, London, Singapore, Tel Aviv, and Sao Paulo. The valuation hit $840 million. Forbes called him a prodigy. TechCrunch crowned him Founder of the Year. Wall Street Journal ran a profile with the headline, "From Scholarship Student to Tech Titan, the Elias Sterling Story." They got the scholarship part right. They had no idea what that scholarship had cost him. His 30th birthday arrived quietly. Elias stood in his penthouse office, looking down on Manhattan glittering below, and felt the same hollow ache he'd felt at 16.
The money was real, the success was real, the empire was real. But some part of him was still that terrified kid being shoved into lockers, still hearing Blake's laughter echo in marble hallways, still believing, despite every piece of evidence to the contrary, that he didn't deserve to be here. When the reunion invitation arrived 3 weeks later, Elias understood immediately what it represented. Not closure, not revenge, an exorcism. He was going back to Ashford not to prove anything to Blake Weston, but to prove something to that 16-year-old kid who'd survived 4 years of systematic cruelty and disappeared into the night believing he was exactly what they'd called him. A loser, a charity case, nothing. It was time to kill that belief permanently.
Blake Weston stood on the terrace of his family's estate, champagne flute in hand, surveying his domain with the satisfaction of a man who'd never questioned his place in the world. The reunion was unfolding exactly as he'd orchestrated. 53 former classmates scattered across manicured lawns and marble terraces, all dressed in their finest, all playing their assigned roles in the theater of inherited privilege. The bartender, hired from the country club, poured top-shelf liquor. The caterers circulated with hors d'oeuvres that cost more per bite than most people's hourly wage. String quartet music drifted through the autumn air, elegant and suffocating. Blake had spent 3 months planning this night, but really he'd been planning it for 12 years. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, tapping his glass with a sterling silver fork. The conversations died obediently. "Before our guest of honor arrives, I thought we could take a little trip down memory lane." Tyler Morrison, Blake's college roommate and eternal accomplice, wheeled out a projection screen with theatrical flair. Chase Drummond dimmed the terrace lights. Vanessa, Blake's fiancée, watched with an expression somewhere between amusement and unease. The first image flickered onto the screen, a yearbook photo from freshman year. Elias Sterling, 16 years old, wearing a uniform that didn't quite fit, his expression guarded and distant. Someone in the crowd snickered. "Remember this guy?" Blake's voice carried the practiced cadence of a stand-up comedian working a friendly room. "Our very own scholarship legend, the kid who actually thought he belonged here." More photos followed, each one carefully selected for maximum humiliation. Elias eating alone in the cafeteria, Elias carrying a stack of textbooks while other students walked past, Elias in his janitor mother's cleaning uniform during Parents' Weekend, the single most mortifying moment of his high school career. "Oh, God, I forgot about that," Chelsea Hartman said, covering her mouth. "Wasn't that the day his mom was working the event?" "Best Parents' Weekend ever," Blake said, grinning. The look on his face when he realized everyone saw her mopping the bathrooms? Priceless. The laughter rippled through the crowd, some genuine, some uncomfortable, all complicit. Grace Mitchell stood near the back, her champagne untouched, her expression troubled. She'd tried to be kind to Elias back then, small gestures that had felt meaningful but were ultimately meaningless against the tide of systematic cruelty. Now, watching Blake's slideshow, she felt the weight of her own cowardice. Sarah Chen, standing beside Grace, set her glass down with deliberate force. "Blake, this is cruel. He's not even here to defend himself." "Defend himself?" Blake laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. "Sarah, relax. It's just nostalgia. Besides, I doubt he even shows up. The RSVP said yes, but come on, can you imagine Elias Sterling walking into this crowd? He's probably sitting in some studio apartment right now, staring at bus fare and realizing he can't afford the trip." "You sent him an invitation specifically to humiliate him," Sarah said quietly. "That's not nostalgia, that's sadism." The terrace went silent. Blake's smile tightened, his jaw clenching in a way Vanessa recognized as dangerous. He didn't like being challenged, especially not in front of an audience. "It's a reunion, Sarah. Everyone's invited. If Elias feels uncomfortable, that's not my problem. Maybe he should have tried harder to fit in back then." "Tried harder?" Grace found her voice, surprising herself. "Blake, you made his life hell. We all watched you do it. Don't rewrite history to make yourself feel better about it." Blake's expression darkened. He wasn't used to resistance, especially not from people he'd always controlled through social pressure and inherited status. "You two always had a soft spot for the charity case. It was pathetic then, and it's pathetic now."
Tyler, sensing the mood shifting dangerously, stepped forward with forced enthusiasm. "Hey, I've got $50 that says if he shows up, he's wearing something from JCPenney. Any takers?" The tension broke slightly as several classmates laughed and pulled out their wallets. Money changed hands, bets were placed. The cruelty normalized itself through the familiar ritual of gambling. Blake checked his Rolex. 7:15 p.m. He's got 3 minutes before we officially declare him a no-show. Then we can stop pretending we actually expected him to. The sound cut through everything, a low, powerful rumble that didn't belong to any of the luxury sedans parked in neat rows. Every head turned toward the driveway. Through the trees lining the private road, something massive and black was approaching, moving with the unhurried confidence of inevitability. Blake's champagne flute froze halfway to his lips. The limousine emerged from the dusk like a statement written in obsidian and chrome, impossibly long, impossibly elegant, impossibly wrong for the narrative Blake had constructed. This wasn't supposed to happen. The vehicle rolled to a stop at the fountain, its polished surface reflecting the mansion's golden light. The engine purred, then went silent. The terrace had gone absolutely still, 53 people holding their collective breath. Blake's hand trembled slightly as he set down his glass. The chauffeur's door opened and a man in full uniform stepped out with military precision. And then the passenger door opened and everything Blake Weston had spent 12 years believing about himself began to crumble.
The limousine sat at the fountain like a black monolith, its presence rewriting the entire geometry of the evening. Every conversation had died. Every glass had stopped moving toward mouths. 53 former classmates stood frozen in a tableau of collective disbelief. Blake's mouth opened and closed without sound. The slideshow still glowed on the projection screen behind him, a yearbook photo of 16-year-old Elias, awkward and isolated. The contrast between that image and the vehicle dominating the driveway was almost obscene. The chauffeur moved with practiced precision, his uniform pristine, his movements those of someone accustomed to serving people who commanded respect rather than inherited it. He walked around the vehicle's length, 30 feet of gleaming obsidian, and positioned himself at the rear passenger door. Grace Mitchell's champagne flute slipped from her fingers. The crystal shattered on stone, the sound impossibly loud in the suffocating silence. She didn't notice. Her eyes were fixed on that door, her hand pressed against her chest as if to physically hold her racing heart in place. Sarah Chen stood beside her, tears already forming before she even knew why. Some part of her understood what was about to happen, understood that they were witnessing something that would divide their lives into before and after. Tyler Morrison had his phone out, recording, his usual smirk replaced by something approaching fear. Chase Drummond had gone pale, his $50 bet suddenly feeling like a cosmic mistake. Vanessa gripped Blake's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his jacket, sensing her fiancé's world tilting on its axis. The chauffeur's white-gloved hand reached for the door handle. Time stretched, elastic and cruel. Someone coughed. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Someone else said, "That can't be him!" But the conviction was already crumbling even as the words emerged. The door opened. A shoe emerged first, Italian leather, custom-made, probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Then a leg, tailored charcoal trousers with a perfect break. Then a hand, strong and assured, accepting the chauffeur's offered support not from necessity, but from the casual comfort of someone accustomed to such gestures. And then Elias Sterling stepped out into the golden light of the estate he would soon own. Gone was every trace of the terrified teenager Blake had tormented. In his place stood a man who commanded boardrooms, a man whose signature determined the fates in 1,000-employee companies, a man who looked like he'd been born in that Brioni suit rather than having earned every thread of it through years of relentless work. His appearance matched the reference image perfectly. Powerful shoulders, impeccable posture, a face that had lost its boyish uncertainty and gained the carved edges of someone who'd survived fires that would have destroyed weaker men. The suit alone probably cost $15,000. The watch on his wrist, a Patek Philippe Grand Complications, was worth more than most of the cars parked in neat rows behind him. But it wasn't the clothes or the watch or even the limousine that made the crowd gasp.
It was his eyes. Where there had once been fear, there was now calm authority. Where there had once been desperate hope for acceptance, there was now the quiet confidence of someone who no longer required anyone's approval, because he'd built his own empire and made the whole world approve. Elias took 3 steps toward the terrace, each footfall deliberate, measured, utterly controlled. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a pathway as if he were royalty. People who'd ignored him for 4 years suddenly couldn't stop staring. People who'd laughed at Blake's slideshow now looked ashamed, their phones lowering, their jokes dying in their throats. Grace was crying openly now, one hand covering her mouth, the other reaching out as if to touch something she couldn't believe was real. "Elias," she whispered, but the word came out strangled, barely audible. Sarah stood frozen, her entire body trembling, years of guilt and regret crashing over her in waves. They'd done nothing. For 4 years they'd watched Blake destroy this person, and they'd done nothing except offer meaningless kindnesses that couldn't stop the systematic cruelty. Blake stood at the top of the terrace steps, trapped between his pride and his growing terror. He was the host. Social convention demanded he greet his guest, but greeting Elias meant acknowledging that something fundamental had shifted, that the power dynamics he'd controlled since freshman year no longer applied. Elias stopped at the base of the steps, looking up at Blake with an expression that was neither angry nor triumphant, just patient, expectant, as if waiting for Blake to finally understand the magnitude of his miscalculation. Behind Blake, the projection screen still showed that yearbook photo, the class loser in an ill-fitting uniform. In front of Blake stood the man who'd killed that version of himself and built something better from the ashes. The autumn evening held its breath, waiting for someone to break the silence that had become unbearable. Finally, Blake forced himself to move forward, his legs unsteady, his palm already sweating as he extended his hand toward the man he'd spent 12 years underestimating. "Elias," he managed, the name emerging strangled and weak. You actually came?"
The handshake lasted 3 seconds too long. Blake's palm was slick with nervous sweat, his grip desperate and overcompensating. Elias's hand remained steady, dry, controlled, the hand of a man who'd signed billion-dollar contracts and never flinched. "Blake," Elias's voice carried across the terrace with effortless authority, "thank you for the invitation." The words were simple, perfectly polite, but something in their delivery made Blake flinch. There was no anger, no bitterness, no trace of the desperate teenage boy who'd once begged to be left alone. Just calm, patient certainty. "That's quite a ride," Blake managed, gesturing toward the limousine with a laugh that came out hollow and brittle. "Did you rent that for the night? Must have cost you." Elias smiled, subtle and enigmatic. "Something like that." He didn't elaborate. The silence that followed was suffocating. Blake shifted his weight, suddenly aware of every eye watching their exchange, every phone recording what would inevitably become the most watched moment of the reunion. The social hierarchy that had defined their high school years was collapsing in real time. People who'd stood near Blake moments ago had taken unconscious steps toward Elias. Conversations that had orbited Blake's influence now tilted toward this new center of gravity. The transformation was tectonic, imperceptible in individual movements, but devastating in aggregate. Vanessa Hartley, Blake's fiancée, who'd never attended Ashford Prep and therefore carried no guilt from those years, approached with genuine curiosity rather than condescension. Her designer gown probably cost $8,000, but standing next to Elias, it suddenly looked like she was trying too hard. "Oh my God, that entrance was absolutely cinematic," she said, extending her hand with a smile that seemed genuinely impressed. "I'm Vanessa. I don't think we've met." "Pleasure to meet you, Vanessa." Elias's handshake was warm, professional, the kind that made people feel seen rather than evaluated. "You have excellent taste. That's a beautiful dress." The compliment was simple but effective. Vanessa blushed, pleased, already gravitating into Elias's orbit without realizing it. Blake watched the exchange with growing horror, seeing his fiancée charmed by the man he'd spent months planning to humiliate. Marcus Chen, who'd sent the warning screenshot, pushed through the crowd with visible relief. "Elias, man, it's so good to see you. You look incredible." "Marcus," Elias's smile warmed slightly, "thanks for the heads up about the group chat." The comment landed like a grenade. Several people in the crowd went pale, suddenly realizing that their private mockery hadn't been private at all. Tyler Morrison's phone recording hand dropped slightly. Chase Drummond looked like he might be sick. Blake's face drained of color. What group chat? Elias didn't answer immediately. He let the question hang, let Blake's imagination fill the gaps, let the discomfort spread through the crowd like a virus. When he finally spoke, his tone was mild, almost conversational. The one where you took bets on whether I'd show up, whether I'd be broke, whether I'd still be... He paused, his eyes meeting Blake's with laser precision. How did you put it? Still pathetic? The terrace went absolutely silent. Someone's champagne glass clinked against stone. Someone else whispered, "Oh shit." Grace Mitchell was crying again, her hand pressed against her mouth. Blake's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. It was a joke, man. You know how group chats are. Everyone talks shit. Everyone talks shit, Elias repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. Interesting perspective. He turned away from Blake then, a dismissal more devastating than any argument. His gaze swept across the crowd, landing on familiar faces, people who'd laughed at Blake's jokes, people who'd watched him suffer and done nothing, people who'd been complicit in 4 years of systematic cruelty. But his expression didn't carry anger. It carried something far more unsettling, pity. Grace, he spotted her near the back, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, it's good to see you both. They moved toward him like survivors, recognizing a lifeline. Grace reached him first, her voice breaking. Elias, I'm so sorry. I should have... You were always kind, Elias said gently, cutting off her spiral of guilt. Both of you. That meant more than you know. Sarah was shaking, unable to speak, years of regret written across her face. Elias squeezed her shoulder briefly, a gesture that somehow communicated forgiveness without requiring her to grovel for it. The crowd was watching this exchange with rapt attention, slowly understanding that they were witnessing something profound, not revenge, but something more complex, a reckoning. Blake, desperate to reassert control, cleared his throat loudly. Well, we should probably head inside. Dinner's almost ready. Elias, I hope you don't mind, but we didn't set up a seat for you at the main table. I can have the staff. That won't be necessary. Something in Elias's tone made every person on that terrace go still. The autumn air crystallized. The golden light seemed to sharpen. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Blake's forced smile wavered. What do you mean? Elias turned back to face him, and for the first time that evening, something dangerous flickered behind his calm exterior. Before we go inside, Blake, there's something everyone should know. He paused, his gaze swept across the assembled crowd before landing back on Blake with devastating precision. About this estate, about tonight, about why I really accepted your invitation.
Blake's face twisted into something ugly, the mask of civility cracking under pressure. 12 years of imagined superiority were collapsing, and he could feel it happening, could feel the power dynamic shifting irreversibly. His voice came out sharp, defensive, laden with the desperation of a man watching his world tilt. Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing here, scholarship. He caught himself, but too late. The word hung in the air like a slur, exactly as it had been intended 12 years ago. Several people in the crowd gasped. Vanessa's hand dropped from Blake's arm, her expression shifting from confusion to disgust. Elias didn't flinch. If anything, his expression became calmer, more patient, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Scholarship, he repeated softly. You still think that defines you, don't you? After all these years, that's still the only way you can frame who I am? That's not what Blake started, but his voice cracked. It's exactly what you meant. Elias's tone remained even, almost gentle, which somehow made it more devastating. You invited me here to prove I was still that scared kid you could push around, still poor, still beneath you, still desperate for your approval. The crowd had formed a loose circle around them now, drawn by the gravitational pull of confrontation. Phones were recording. No one was pretending to look away. This was the moment the entire evening had been building toward. Blake tried to recover, his laugh forced and brittle. Jesus, Elias, you're being dramatic. So you made some money, rented a fancy car, bought a nice suit. Good for you. But don't come to my family's estate and act like you're suddenly... Your family's estate? Elias let the words hang there, tasting them. Tell me, Blake, how much do you actually know about your family's business situation? Something in the question made Blake hesitate. His confidence, already shaken, wavered visibly. What are you talking about? Weston Properties, your father's commercial real estate company, the one that's been struggling since the 2020 market correction.
Weston Properties, the one that took on significant debt to maintain its portfolio, the one that quietly sold majority shares to Blackstone Holdings 6 months ago to avoid bankruptcy. Blake's face went from red to white in seconds. How do you... That's confidential. Blackstone Holdings is a subsidiary of Sterling Capital Group, which I founded 4 years ago to manage my investment portfolio. As of last week, Sterling Capital acquired Meridian Ventures in a $2.3 billion transaction that made headlines in the Wall Street Journal. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the string quartet had stopped playing, the musicians sensing something monumental happening on the terrace. Blake staggered slightly, as if physically struck. "You're lying." "I'm not." Elias pulled out his phone, tapped the screen twice, and held it up. The Wall Street Journal headline was clearly visible. Sterling Capital completes Meridian acquisition, expands real estate holdings. Tyler Morrison, standing close enough to see, read it aloud in a voice that had lost all its earlier mockery. "Holy shit, that's real." Elias pocketed his phone, his gaze never leaving Blake's face. "Which means, Blake, that I now own the parent company of Weston Properties. Your family's business, the one that's paid for this estate, your cars, your lifestyle, ultimately answers to me." Vanessa took 3 steps backward, distancing herself from Blake physically and symbolically. Grace Mitchell was crying again, but this time the tears seemed almost relieved, as if watching justice finally arrive after 12 years of delay. Blake's mouth opened and closed, his entire worldview restructuring in real time. The man he'd tormented, the kid he'd called charity case, the person he'd spent months planning to humiliate, now held his family's financial future in his hands. "You can't," Blake started, but the words died. Because Elias could, and they both knew it. "I'm not interested in destroying your family's business," Elias said quietly. "I'm not interested in revenge. That's not why I'm here." "Then why?" The question came out as a whisper, stripped of all arrogance. Elias's smile was slight, enigmatic, carrying depths Blake would never fully understand. "Because you need to learn something that took me 12 years to figure out. Your worth isn't determined by who you can push down, and my worth was never determined by whether you pushed me." He turned away then, another dismissal, his attention shifting to the mansion behind them. The Weston family estate, built from inherited wealth, maintained through generations of privilege, now indirectly controlled by the scholarship kid who'd scrubbed its floors. "Now," Elias said, his voice carrying across the terrace with quiet authority, "shall we talk about the real reason I accepted this invitation?" Blake stood frozen, a man who just realized he'd been playing checkers while Elias played 3-dimensional chess, and the game wasn't even close to over.
Blake's face had gone from white to gray, the color of ash. His world was imploding in slow motion, each revelation stripping away another layer of the identity he'd built on inherited privilege and casual cruelty. But he still stood on his family's estate, surrounded by his guests, hosting an event in a home that had belonged to the Westons for 3 generations. That last shred of dignity was about to be incinerated. Elias turned to face the mansion, his gaze sweeping across its limestone facade, the perfectly manicured gardens, the fountain where his limousine still sat like a statement written in chrome and obsidian. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone on the terrace lean forward involuntarily. "This estate is magnificent. 12 acres, built in 1924, renovated in 2008, appraised value of $8.7 million. He turned back to Blake, his expression unreadable. "Your family's been trying to sell it for 18 months, haven't they?" Blake's throat worked, but no sound emerged. Vanessa had moved several steps away now, her designer gown seeming suddenly cheap against the backdrop of what she was witnessing. "The market's been difficult," Elias continued, his tone conversational, almost sympathetic. "Too expensive for most buyers, too outdated for the ultra-wealthy who want smart homes and modern amenities. Your father listed it at $9.2 million, then dropped it to $8.5 million, then $7.9 million. Still no offers." "How do you know that?" Tyler Morrison asked, his voice strangled. Elias didn't look at Tyler. His eyes remained locked on Blake. "Because 3 weeks ago, Sterling Capital made an offer through a shell company, all cash, $8.2 million, closed escrow last Tuesday." The words landed like physical blows. Grace Mitchell gasped. Sarah Chen's hand flew to her mouth. Marcus Chen whispered, "Oh my God!" Blake staggered backward, his hand reaching for the terrace railing to steady himself. "No, that's impossible. My father would have told me." "Your father doesn't tell you everything, Blake." Elias's voice remained gentle, which somehow made it more devastating. "He probably didn't want you to know the estate had to be sold, didn't want you to know how bad the financial situation had gotten, didn't want you to know that the Weston legacy was crumbling." "You're lying," Blake's voice cracked, desperate, pleading. "This is my family's home. We've had it for generations. You can't just—" Elias pulled out his phone again, tapped the screen, and held it up. The document was clearly visible, a deed transfer dated 6 days ago, transferring ownership of the Weston estate from Weston Family Trust to Horizon Properties LLC, a Sterling Capital subsidiary. Chase Drummond, close enough to read it, went pale. Jesus Christ, it's real! The revelation rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. 53 former classmates processed the same impossible truth simultaneously. They weren't attending a reunion at Blake Weston's family estate. They were attending a reunion at Elias Sterling's newly acquired property. Blake had invited his former victim to be humiliated at an estate the victim now owned. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. So when you said the invitation was to your family's estate, you were technically correct, but it stopped being your family's estate last Tuesday at 3:47 p.m. when the title transfer was recorded, which means, Blake, that you're not actually the host tonight. He let that sink in, watching as Blake's face cycle through emotions too complex to name: rage, humiliation, disbelief, devastation. "I am." The two words hung in the autumn air like a verdict. The string quartet had stopped playing entirely. The caterers had emerged from the kitchen, sensing something historic unfolding. Even the bartender had stopped pouring, his attention fixed on the terrace, where a man who'd been called a charity case for 4 years had just revealed he owned the ground beneath their feet. Blake's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the terrace steps, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Whether from rage or tears or the sheer psychological weight of his humiliation, no one could tell. Vanessa stood apart from him, her expression carefully neutral, already calculating how to distance herself from a man whose status had evaporated in minutes. Tyler and Chase exchanged glances, their earlier mockery replaced by something approaching fear. They'd bet money on Elias showing up broke. They'd laughed at Blake's slideshow. They'd been complicit in the trap. And now the trap had closed, but they were inside it. Elias looked around at the assembled crowd, people who'd watched him suffer, people who'd participated in his torment, people who'd done nothing while Blake Weston spent 4 years trying to destroy him. "I didn't buy this estate for revenge," Elias said quietly, but his voice carried to every corner of the terrace. "I bought it because it's a good investment, because unlike some people, I don't make decisions based on high school grudges." He paused, his gaze sweeping across their faces one final time. "But I'd be lying if I didn't say the timing wasn't satisfying." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Blake's ragged breathing and the distant sound of Elias's limousine engine, still idling, still ready to carry him away from this place whenever he decided he was finished, which, as everyone was beginning to understand, would be entirely on his terms.
The terrace had cleared. Most of the guests had retreated inside or to their cars, unable to process what they'd witnessed, unwilling to stay in the presence of their own complicity. Blake had disappeared entirely, escorted by Vanessa to one of the guest houses, his humiliation too complete to endure publicly. Elias stood alone near the fountain, looking up at the mansion that had once represented everything denied to him. Now it was just property, expensive, beautiful, but ultimately just stone and glass and inherited history that meant nothing compared to what he'd built with his own hands. Elias. He turned to find Grace and Sarah approaching, both of them looking like they'd been crying for the past 20 minutes. Grace's makeup was ruined, black streaks down her cheeks. Sarah's hands were shaking, clutching a tissue that had been twisted into oblivion. "I'm sorry,"
Grace's voice broke immediately. "I'm so sorry for everything, for watching it happen, for not doing enough, for being too scared to stand up to Blake when it mattered." "We were cowards," Sarah added, her words tumbling out in a rush. "We saw what he was doing to you, and we did nothing real to stop it. A few kind words, a sympathetic smile, that wasn't enough. We knew it wasn't enough, and we did it anyway because it was easier than risking our own social standing." Elias studied them both, these two women who'd shown him the only glimpses of humanity during 4 years of systematic cruelty. They'd been teenagers then, trapped in the same rigid social hierarchy that had crushed him. He couldn't absolve them completely. Their guilt was theirs to carry, but he could offer something more valuable than forgiveness. "You were kind when no one else was," he said quietly. "That mattered more than you know. There were days when your small gestures were the only thing that kept me believing I wasn't what Blake said I was." Grace sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Sarah reached out tentatively, then pulled back, unsure if she had the right to touch him, to seek comfort from someone they'd failed to protect. "What you're doing now," Elias continued, "acknowledging it, owning it, that takes courage too. Most people in there won't even manage that." "It's not enough," Grace whispered. "It'll never be enough." "No," Elias agreed, "but it's something." The silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. The autumn evening had grown cooler, the sun fully set now, the estate's exterior lights casting everything in gold and shadow. "What are you both doing now?" Elias asked, shifting the conversation toward something more constructive. "Professionally, I mean."
Grace wiped her eyes, surprised by the question. "I'm a marketing director at a pharmaceutical company. It's fine. Not exactly fulfilling, but it pays well." "I'm in corporate law," Sarah said, "mid-level associate at a firm in Boston, drowning in billable hours and wondering if this is really what I want to do for the next 30 years. Elias nodded, considering. "Sterling Innovations is expanding our marketing division. We're also building out our legal department, particularly around intellectual property and international contracts." He pulled 2 business cards from his wallet, handing one to each of them. "If you're interested in something different, something that might actually matter, send me your resumes. I can't promise anything, but I can promise a fair interview." Grace stared at the card like it might disappear if she looked away. "You're offering us jobs? After everything?" "I'm offering you interviews," Elias corrected gently. "What happens after that depends on your qualifications and whether you're the right fit. I don't hire people out of guilt or sentimentality, but I do believe in second chances, and I believe people can grow beyond who they were at 17. Sarah was crying again, but differently now, relief mixed with something like hope. "Thank you. You don't know what this means." "I do, actually." Elias's smile was slight but genuine. "I know exactly what it means to be given an opportunity when you don't think you deserve one." Behind them, James approached from the limousine, his timing impeccable. "Mr. Sterling, whenever you're ready, sir." Elias nodded, then turned back to Grace and Sarah. "I should go. This place," he gestured at the estate, the fountain, the perfectly manicured grounds, "it doesn't define me anymore. It never really did." Grace impulsively hugged him, a fierce embrace that conveyed 12 years of regret and gratitude. Sarah followed, her arms wrapping around both of them, creating a moment of connection that felt like forgiveness without requiring the word. When they separated, Elias walked toward the limousine, his footsteps echoing on the driveway. James held the door open, professional and patient. Before stepping inside, Elias turned one final time to look at the Weston estate, the symbol of everything that had once seemed unreachable, the site of his greatest humiliation and his most complete victory. Then he climbed into the limousine, and James closed the door behind him. The vehicle pulled away slowly, deliberately, its taillights disappearing down the tree-lined driveway as autumn leaves scattered in its wake. Inside, Elias Sterling, no longer the charity case, no longer the class loser, no longer defined by the cruelty of people who'd never mattered, allowed himself a small, private smile. He'd come back to prove nothing to Blake Weston. He'd come back to prove everything to himself. And now, finally, he could leave it all behind. The limousine reached the main road and turned toward Manhattan, carrying him forward into a future he'd built with his own hands, leaving the ghosts of Ashford Preparatory Academy in the rearview mirror where they belonged. Forever.
So, Elias Sterling walked away from his past, finally free after 12 years of carrying that weight. But here's the thing. You just spent the last 40 minutes watching his journey, from bullied scholarship kid to billionaire who bought his Bullies estate. You felt every moment of that limousine entrance. You celebrated when Blake's world collapsed. You got emotional when Grace and Sarah apologized. And yet, some of you still haven't hit that subscribe button. Let me put this in perspective. Elias spent 12 years building an empire just to prove he was more than what people said he was. And you can't spend 2 seconds clicking a button to support stories like this? I'm not asking you to buy a limousine or build a tech company. I'm asking for a like, a subscribe, maybe a comment telling me which moment hit you hardest. Was it the group chat exposure, the estate revelation, the final drive away? Because here's the truth. Every time someone watches this whole story and then scrolls away without engaging, it's like watching Elias get shoved into those lockers all over again. You witnessed something powerful, felt something real, and then nothing. Don't be like Blake's classmates who watched and did nothing. Be like Grace and Sarah. Show up, own it, hit that subscribe button. And if this story made you feel anything at all, anger, triumph, satisfaction, catharsis, then prove it. Leave a comment. Share this with someone who needs to hear that the losers don't always stay losing. Elias didn't build his empire by staying silent, and you don't build a community by staying invisible. Subscribe, like, comment. 3 clicks. That's it. Or don't and wonder why channels like this disappear while mindless content thrives. Your choice. Welcome to Midnight Plot Stories. I'll see you in the next one, if you actually subscribe.